There we go. There we go. Yeah, and then we have the attendees starting to join there. So I usually just give it a few minutes at the start to let people get adjusted and kind of figure out their settings and all of that. But I know it's also often a thing that, you know, life comes in the way and sometimes people can't attend in the evenings and things
of course,
something happens. So I just keep track until the number usually stops going up, and then I'll send the
I see it
recording
going
to
up very
everyone.
quickly. Yeah, I'm like, whoa,
Yeah, see?
people are on time.
As they should be. They're very keen to hear from you. So am I, you know. So I'm thrilled to be here. I'm just lucky that this is my job.
I know, like, best job ever.
It really is. It absolutely is. So it's never really a hardship, to be honest.
That's good. That's good.
So I can see there that someone has turned on closed captioning, which is great. So just to let everyone know, if anyone's joining and they'd like access to closed captioning or the transcription service, you should have that option down the bottom as well.
Oh yeah, I see that.
Yeah, it's handy sometimes, just in case, you know. I think it's also just really handy myself when I listen back to webinars and there's like accent differences, or maybe someone speaks really fast or something like that, or some days I'm just having a kind of processing day where things just feel a bit like
you need
delayed.
to read the words as well. I'm like that often. Yeah,
absolutely.
I often put subtitles on when I'm just watching telly, just because I'm like,
I'm a subtitles person. I find it really alarming when I go to the cinema and there's no subtitles.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, what?
I've gotten really reliant on this. So I suppose I'll just welcome everyone coming in. I'm sure a few more will come in as we're going.
Should I mute myself for now?
If you want, yeah, if you want.
Just
and
in case there's any background noise,
I will just, there you go. So welcome to everyone joining us. It's so nice to have everyone here. I personally always love doing these kind of webinars because I learn a lot as well, selfishly, but also because it's nice to kind of see some of the familiar names on the attendee list as well, who take part in our groups and stuff. But thank you for joining us on this Tuesday evening. I was going to say, I hope it's a nice evening. In Kerry, it's miserable and raining, so we won't get ahead of ourselves. But just to, I suppose, give a little bit of background information, this webinar is going to be recorded. The recording is on at the moment, so when that loads, that should load overnight to our cloud service. I'll send it on to the attendee list and registrations list tomorrow. So everyone will have access to that, just in case you have to leave or you missed a bit or you want to watch it back. To be honest, I listen back to a lot of recordings. It's just, it helps. So there's not any pressure to try and, you know, take notes or anything like that. You will see down the bottom that our chat function is enabled. I'd just like everyone to note that this is enabled just to allow you to chat myself and Niamh. So if you're writing in there and it's maybe a general comment to the community, they won't see it, it's just us. And it's more there, I suppose, in case you're having maybe tech issues or we're having tech issues and someone needs to tell us. Or if you just like to ask us a question in private, it's absolutely fine. You will see that the Q&A function is also enabled. And down there, you can ask your questions as we're going through the webinar. We're going to try and roughly stick to an hour, but it usually, you know, we usually go over a little bit, but that's okay. But you can ask questions as you think of them or as they come up in the Q&A function, and hopefully we'll have time at the end to get to some of them anyway. Or you never know, I often find I ask questions and then as we go through the webinar, they're answered. But feel free, as you're having any thoughts or anything like that, to put them in the Q&A function and we'll hopefully get to them. So I think we have a pretty solid number at the moment anyway. I know I can already see emails coming in of people asking for the recording once this is done, which is always a good sign as well. But just to give everyone a little bit of context, I'm just going to share my screen briefly, if that's all right. And I promise I will then hand it over and stop talking. But everyone's very keen to hear from Niamh and not me. But I suppose just to give a bit of background, this webinar is brought to you from the Adult Support and Employment Department, which is one of our now many departments in As I Am, which is brilliant. I've been with As I Am for about 2 years, I think. And since that time, we've kind of exploded, I guess, really, in terms of the different departments we have, the different services. But essentially, I'm the Adult Support and Wellbeing Officer. I like to run groups for our adult community. I'm autistic myself. I really, really benefit from them too. And it's kind of a twofold approach, the program, where we like to run groups that are wellbeing based and maybe, you know, peer support groups, places where autistic people can come and talk about their experiences in a very safe, non-judgmental environment. And then also to have kind of activity groups that are just fun, to be honest, like art or mindfulness or a book club or things like that, you know, that are just fun. So I would say, just in case anyone wants to follow up after this or learn more about the program or anything like that, you can find us at adult groups at asiam.ie. They're for autistic adults over the age of 18. You don't need to have a formal diagnosis. We're very aware, I suppose, in ASIAM that there's 1,000 barriers to assessment, and also that self-identification is entirely valid, really, as an experience. So that's just to give a little bit of background, and just in case you have any questions, adultgroups@asiam.ie, or you can email me directly at jennifer@asiam.ie, just in case you have a maybe more general question. But other than that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen now, and I will mute myself and I'll turn off the camera, but I'll be in the background just in case anyone has any questions or anything. And I'll hand you over to the reason we're all here, which is Niamh. I'd just like to say Niamh is a fantastic author. Niamh's a fantastic author of a gorgeous book, Looking After Your Autistic Self, that I was very quick to buy instantly. I don't have a copy to hold up. I was going to hold up my Kindle, but I didn't think that would be impactful. But you know, you get the idea. But truly, it's brilliant in terms of having different, I suppose, techniques for handling stress, but also identifying stress, which I guess maybe as a community we don't talk about that much and we never get a chance to talk about. So I, for one, am excited to have Niamh here. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, hand it over to Niamh, and I'll be in the background in case anyone has any issues. So off you go, Niamh.
Thanks very much, Jennifer. I'm hoping you can see my screen here.
We can see and we can hear you, so you're all good.
You can see my slides. Brilliant.
Yeah, you're all good.
Hi, everybody. I'm Niamh Garvey, and I'm delighted to be here tonight. It's my first webinar at all, let alone my first webinar with ASIAM. So I really hope now all the tech side goes well for me, because I just have to look at a computer and it breaks. So bear with me and pop in the chat box if there's any issues, and Jennifer will be having a look at that as we go along. So if there's any technical issues, she'll be able to spot that if anyone says it. So I'll just start with who I am, and then I will just give you an outline of what this presentation is going to be about. So I'm Niamh Garvey. I'm an autistic author. My first book, he's called Looking After Your Autistic Self, a personalized self-care approach to managing your sensory and emotional well-being. That was published this year with Jessica Kingsley Publishers. I've also just signed for my second book, which is going to be a children's book called Being Autistic and what that actually means. And it'll be a neuroaffirmative guide to children and teenagers and anyone, to be honest, who just wants to know what it means to be autistic without any negative labeling, trying to give children a positive understanding and outlook on their own autism. So I have completed a 2-year diploma in autism studies in UCC. It's a really fantastic diploma. I learned an awful lot about it. It is how I began to realize I was autistic myself. I'm also a registered nurse. I'm 36. I'll be 37 next year, but I'm holding up next week, but I'm going to hold on to the 36 years old for today. And I live in Cork with my husband and my 3 children. And that's my Twitter, my Fediverse, and my Instagram handles there if anyone's interested. I don't run my own Instagram, just so you know. I can only take so much social media at a time. So this presentation will explain what a stress trigger is. I'll be discussing the differences between immediate stress responses versus long-term or chronic stress response. I'm going to look at different types of triggers, specific now to autistic people. I will explain why autistic people can find it hard to know what our triggers are. I will look at what can affect our ability to cope with triggers, because your ability to cope with any trigger can change per hour, per minute, per day, per year. I'm going to introduce the detective habit, which is a habit I came up with, and it's in my book. So I know some people here have already read my book, so I'll be just going over that again. I'll explain the 8 steps of the detective habit. So that will break down how you use the detective habit on yourself, because it's an individualized strategy. You use it on yourself. It's not one rule for everybody, because obviously every autistic person has different triggers. As part of the detective habit, I'm going to explain what a quick calm plan is. And that's just, that's going to be small. Now, that's a big section in my book, and there's a lot more I could discuss about that, but I'm just going to briefly introduce it. And then I'm going to give an example of how I use the detective habit to identify and manage my own autistic triggers. So my own need to identify my autistic triggers. I just wanted to begin with this to explain why I ever started to question what my autistic triggers were. Because sometimes when people get the diagnosis of autism, we just kind of bandy everything in under, oh, that's because I'm autistic. And we don't always actually think to break down what our individual stress triggers are. And because we're all so different, what triggers me isn't what triggers you. Yes, we might share a lot of triggers, but it doesn't mean we all have the same individual triggers. I'm a parent of an autistic child. That's how I first even entered the whole area of autism. She was diagnosed, and I started looking for information on autism and what was triggering her. And I just found a complete lack of consistent information, and more importantly, a lack of evidence-based information. And I think my background in nursing, I would have been published in journals in nursing as well. So I'm a real evidence-based kind of person. So just a complete lack of evidence-based information, and the fact that all these professionals were giving me totally different advice, that really led me to start a diploma in autism. And it was as I was doing the diploma, I realized, oh, I'm autistic myself. I have all the same traits, but just they show themselves differently to my daughter. The diploma also really taught me that we need to understand our own triggers. And a lot of people think about it for children, but we forget about it for adults. But as autistic adults ourselves, I think it's really important we learn our own triggers and what to do to support ourselves when we're triggered. About 2 years ago, I was also diagnosed. Oh, sorry, I see a spelling mistake there. My spelling's atrocious, so apologies for spelling mistakes. I was diagnosed with autoimmune arthritis, and I also have hypermobile EDS, which stands for hypermobile Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, which means I've extremely flexible joints. Both these conditions are more common in autistic people, and both of them get worse with stress. So I realized I had a lot of reasons to figure out my triggers. I was a parent. I needed to manage my own autism so I could help my child's autism. I wanted to understand what was stressing me. I wanted to understand my own autism. And I also knew that I needed to get on top of my own stress so that I could manage my physical conditions. So what is a trigger? A trigger is anything that creates a stress response. It's something that makes you feel unsafe. For autistic people, we tend to have an increased response to stress. We might get a stress response just from one trigger, or we might not get the stress response until we've had a buildup of triggers. So it might be one really, really significant trigger, like a moment of conflict with your boss or with your sister or something. And that's enough to send you into a huge stress response. Or it can be a buildup of triggers. It could be the loud noise. It might be having to eat in a canteen earlier in the day. It might be the fact that you cannot think what to cook for the dinner. And it builds up and builds up and builds up as the day goes on. And then by the evening or at some certain point, you feel stressed. And the stress response, as most people probably know, is we hit a point where our body wants to fight the stress or flee it, or we freeze. So that's called fight, flight, and freeze. Research has shown that autistic people release higher levels of stress hormones. The stress hormone, the main one is cortisol, and the hormone also lasts longer in our bodies. So we are significantly more affected by stress. Now, it's also important to be aware that a trigger is something we perceive as a danger or a threat, but it doesn't actually mean it's a real danger. So if we hear a loud noise and we're triggered, our body has perceived a real danger, but there is no actual real danger. Our body is not in danger, but that doesn't matter to your body. Your body still releases cortisol. Your body still has the stress response. And because autistic people are more likely to be triggered by things in our everyday environment, it does mean we get triggered more often, and therefore we hit the stress response more frequently. There's also a difference between your immediate stress response, which means that you're having the stress response right now, right when you're exposed to the trigger. And then there's chronic stress response, which means it's a buildup of the stress response to persistent triggers. But the immediate stress response, the three things that can happen are fight, flight, and freeze. So for autistic people, fight, it means our body prepares to fight. This can show itself as a meltdown. So when we have a meltdown, it's going to be different for everyone. You might feel agitated, you might feel very angry, you might start crying, you might become aggressive to yourself, you might skin pick, some people head bang. I was actually reading Fern Brady's book, Strong Female Character, and when she has a meltdown, she starts wrecking the furniture in her house and she literally pulls cupboard doors down, like very distressing. And the meltdown response can just increase your stress response because you're kind of aware of what you're doing, but you're not in control of what you're doing. So it can turn into a bit of a vicious circle. Then the flight immediate stress response can be meltdowns or shutdowns. So examples of a meltdown of a flight might be bolting. You can't cope, you're going to have a meltdown and you're just going to run away. Or you might just have to go somewhere to hide. You might not be able to cope with someone touching you. There's a lot of different things that different people can have. You might just cry and be unable to cope. The freeze response then is quite common as well in autistic people. And when we have a freeze response, it can mean that we lose skills we already have. It can mean that we cannot function. It might mean that if you're a speaking person, you might hit a point where you are unable to speak. If you're already a non-speaking autistic adult, you might hit a point where you suddenly can no longer use your assistive technology. So basically your ability to function just shuts down. You just shut down like a computer switching off. You can also have all of these responses at once. It might begin with a meltdown and then it can turn into a shutdown and then it can turn into a freeze. So it's not just one thing and that's it. It can move. It's not linear. So chronic stress response then, this can happen over days or weeks or months, and chronic exposure to your stress triggers can cause physical and mental challenges and changes. So for example, physical changes for me when I have chronic exposure to stress is my autoimmune arthritis gets worse. I can get into such severe pain that I can't walk. I can develop irritable bowel syndrome, also known as IBS. Mental challenges, I can experience anxiety, acute anxiety, or otherwise just kind of a baseline chronic anxiety, like all the time about me. Depression, problems sleeping, apologies. One of the more well-known, like increasingly well-known parts of being autistic now and having a chronic stress response is that some autistic adults in particular, but children also, can hit autistic burnout. So autistic burnout is a period of intense fatigue and feeling stressed, where you might feel unable to carry out your daily activities at all or without extreme effort. Now, I don't just mean for half an hour, that's a shutdown, but I mean that it can go on for a day, it can go on for a couple of days, it can go on for weeks, it can go on for months. burnout can also bring increased sensitivity to sensory stimuli. So if you're having burnout, you might notice that suddenly you have a bigger problem with the sensory stimuli in your environment. You might become worse at understanding your own feelings. You might become unable to notice when you're hungry. You don't know, you can't look after your own basic needs. And it also just increases our triggers in general, our response to triggers. So any little demand can feel completely overwhelming, when a week ago we'd no problem doing it at all. There's a really good publication by Raymaker et al., published in 2020, and that describes autistic burnout as chronic fatigue, loss of skills, and reduced tolerance to stimulus. So I think that's a really good definition. It just sums it up nicely. For me, autistic burnout feels like all of my autism explodes and all my traits become much more significant and much more impairing on my daily living. So there's lots of types of triggers, but these are the 6 main ones, and these are the 6 ones I'm going to explain. So I'll go into each of these 6 now. So sensory triggers, emotional triggers, cognitive triggers, social triggers, communication triggers, and executive function triggers. Executive function triggers are part of cognitive triggers, but as they have such specific demands, and I've decided to give them their own category, and they're particularly relevant for anyone who's autistic and also has ADHD, which is a lot of people. So the first one is sensory triggers. So when it comes to sensory triggers, it can be something in our environment that triggers us, or it can be something within ourselves or in our own body that triggers us. So the 5 ones from outside of the environment, the 5 main senses of what we react to in our environment are noise, smell, taste, sight, and touch. So with noise, it might be the volume of something, it might be the type of noise. For example, I cannot stand white noise. I know a lot of people adore white noise and even put it on to go to sleep. I cannot listen to it. It makes my brain feel like it's vibrating. Smell, what you smell in your environment, what you're tasting. And sometimes people mix up taste and touch because what you're tasting is different to the texture of the food you're eating. So if you're having a problem with a texture of a food, it might actually be your touch sense and not your taste sense. But it might be the 2 senses triggered as well. Our sight sense, this is a huge one for me, and I think it's one that people underplay for autism actually. So your sight sense can be triggered by the visual layout of the room, the design of the room, the patterns. I find asymmetry in an environment can be very stressful. And I can also, if I am feeling stressed already and there's a lot of patterns, I kind of get obsessive about the patterns, and I have to count the patterns and follow the patterns, and I get really upset if there's like if there's tiles and then suddenly the pattern changes, or those tiles that are quite popular now where each tile is a completely different pattern. I find that very visually overwhelming. And then the 5th external sense is touch. So that could be fabric, tags on your clothes, seams, other people touching you. Then the 3 internal senses are inside your body senses, which are extremely important senses and are probably the most important senses and are more important than the top 5, because these are what helps us to feel grounded in ourselves. So the first one is your balance or your vestibular sense. Now this is controlled and triggered behind your ear. So it affects, like if you move your head to the side, or if you crunch food, or if you suck something through a straw, that is activating your vestibular sense behind your ear. So if you are doing an awful lot of movement and your head is going here, there, and everywhere, if you're on a swing, if you're not moving enough, if you feel off balance, all those things can affect your vestibular sense. If you're not doing enough movement and you're sitting down at your computer for 3 hours and then you suddenly get up, you might realize, oh, I feel a bit off. You might not know why you're off, but it might be that your vestibular sense has been triggered. The next sense is your body awareness sense, or your proprioception, and this means where your body is in space. It really affects how grounded you are, and poor proprioception can really affect your coordination. Examples of poor proprioception might be that you don't estimate the distance between you and the door frame, and you might walk into the door frame as you're trying to leave the door, or you might stub your toe. You think you're further away from things in your environment than you actually are. And then your last main sense is your interoception. And this is huge for autistic people. It's probably the most important sense in my own life that I have to pay an awful lot of attention to. So this is the awareness of your feelings in your body. So that means, do you feel when you're hungry? Do you feel that you have a pain in your tummy? It's also your emotions. Do you feel upset? Do you feel happy? And if you have poor interoception, it means you might not notice when your body needs you to meet one of its basic needs. You might feel a pain in your tummy, but you don't know that means you're hungry. So that can be hugely triggering because you don't know how to listen to your body, and therefore you don't meet your basic needs. So that's the sensory senses in a very short nutshell. That's a whole topic by itself. So I hope that's giving you some idea of what sensory triggers are. Emotional triggers. So a lot of autistic people have alexithymia. Alexithymia means that you do not recognize what emotions you feel, or you have difficulty recognizing them. It can make life feel very scary and unpredictable because you know you feel something, but you don't know what it is. It can appear that autistic people go from 0 to 90, that you think, I was totally fine, and then suddenly I flipped the lid and I was so angry. But actually, it's probably that you have some level of alexithymia and you did not notice or recognize that your anger or whatever emotion you were feeling was building until suddenly you hit 90 and you cannot cope, or you hit meltdown. So that's a huge trigger for people not recognizing what they're feeling. Emotional dysregulation is also really common for autistic people. So you might know what you're feeling, but you don't know what to do with that feeling. So you might feel angry, but you've no idea how to regulate yourself. You've no idea how to manage your emotion and your mood. And that means that everyday emotions can become huge, big triggers. And that includes positive emotions, such as excitement. And just to give you an example of that, the day I heard I got my first book deal, I became so excited. I squealed, I stimmed, and then suddenly I started bawling and I was shaking and I was anxious, and I had to go to bed and lie down under my weighted blanket, because even though it's a positive emotion, it should be a comfortable emotion. It completely dysregulated me. Excitement feels very like anxiety, and I just couldn't cope, and I had to go to bed for the rest of the day, even though I should have been celebrating I'd achieved my goal. So the final one I'll discuss with emotional triggers then is anxiety, because I think anxiety is just part and parcel of autism. The National Autism Society in the UK says 40 to 50% of autistic people receive a clinical diagnosis of anxiety disorder. But I would imagine that that statistic is actually much higher, because most of us don't actually go and get an official clinical diagnosis of anxiety. You're told you've autism, go on away now, you've autism, but you don't actually get a separate diagnosis of anxiety in general, unless you end up going to your GP or psychiatrist and needing medication or needing therapy to support yourself. For me, and in my experience of a lot of people, anxiety is a constant trigger. It's not just one big trigger. It's a constant low-grade anxiety all the time following you around. And then when we have an actual thing to be anxious about, we can have acute extreme anxiety. Cognitive triggers. There are endless cognitive triggers. It depends on you yourself. But some of the more common ones, and certainly ones that affect me, would be unpredictability. That's famously a problem for autistic people. Plan changes. When someone changes the plan, I can go from 0 to 90. And it's not that I had alexithymia, it's that the plan has suddenly changed and my emotional response just goes way up, and I have a massive acute stress response. Transitions is a really big one for a lot of autistic people too. So transition is moving from one task to another, or from one location to another. So it might be moving from work to going home. It could be something huge like transitioning from secondary school to adult life. And just the transition alone is a huge trigger for you. Demands and responsibility. And I think this really increases when you're an adult, and the world, your families, jobs, bills, just anything like that, the demands and responsibilities just hugely increase on us. So there are constant new cognitive triggers. And then just there's mental load. There's a lot of talk these days about mental load, especially for women and especially for mothers. And that's just trying to keep on top of everything and keep everything together. Like, especially now as a mum, because I have 3 children, for me, the big mental load I have to try to keep on top of, are the uniforms washed? Do I have enough food for their lunches? What am I going to have for dinner? Do I need to do a play date? It's just endless mental. It's an actual, feels like a big load on your mental state. And it means it's really hard to actually just really relax, because there's always something stressing you in your head. And there's social triggers. So, for example, the fear of rejection or actual rejection is also extremely stressful, or the doubt of being rejection. Sometimes I've had situations and I don't know, have I been rejected? Am I being rejected? I'm not quite sure. The social confusion, being in a social situation and being confused about what is actually happening here or what are people talking about. Conflict is a huge social trigger. Having a fight with someone, or the fear of having a fight with someone, trying to balance being assertive and standing up for your beliefs and your morals, especially as an autistic people, because we feel very strongly about our beliefs and our morals, but also fearing having a conflict with someone and the implications of that. Having a lack of fitting in, making social mistakes and the fear of it, over analysing post-socialising. I think this is very common, that when we leave the situation, we've gone home after we've socialised, and next thing, we're analysing everything we did in the social situation and trying to think, oh God, did they say that? Or did I mean that? Did I come across rude? Or should I not have said that? Did I talk too much? Did I overshare? Oh my God, I overshared. And it can be really exhausting. So you think, right, the social situation's gone, phew, then you go home and the over-analysing starts. And that is a huge stress trigger. Social exhaustion, I call this my social hangover, just the pure energy depletion you get after socializing. And then probably the biggest social stress trigger is masking. And masking means hiding your autistic traits and trying to look as if you're not autistic, and trying to look as if you're okay with what's going on around you and the sensory triggers, but actually you're not, and you're really struggling. And that's hugely stressful and really can increase our chronic stress response in particular. Communication triggers then. So eye contact, trying to appear interested. Do I look interested enough? Am I maintaining enough eye contact? Personally, I don't think any of us need to maintain eye contact, but it can be difficult in a situation not to. Whether you're speaking or whether you're non-speaking or whether you go in and out, a lot of people find it hard to speak when they become stressed, and that can be stressful in itself, because if you have no clear method to communicate with the people around you, that's really stressful. You can't have your voice heard, and we all need to be heard. Non-literal language confusion. So sayings and jokes, I personally can find sayings really difficult, even though I use sayings myself all the time, but in my head I know why I'm saying it. But if someone else says saying, I will always hear the literal words, and I have to take a minute and I have to think about what they've just said. And that just increases confusion then, because by the time I've figured out what they've said and I've joined back in the conversation has moved on, and I no longer know what anyone is talking about. And jokes as well are also non-literal language, and a lot of autistic people have difficulty with some types of jokes, especially sarcasm. And then some autistic people are amazing at jokes, and I am not one of them, unfortunately. So as well, another communication trigger is just the effort involved in having a conversation and in noticing all the conversation clues that go on, trying to always pay attention to other people's facial expression, their body language, listening for nuances, figuring out, is what they're saying literal? Is what they're saying what they mean they're saying, or is their face saying that they're being sarcastic? It's just exhausting. And then questioning the conversation nonstop, always wondering, are you following the conversation correctly, or have you got lost there? Trying to get the listening talking balance right. This is a big one for me. I'm an awful talker, and I talk, and then I realize, oh gee, I never listened. I never asked them anything about themselves. And then of course that brings in the social overanalyzing, and that just makes me feel awful then later on. And then I feel anxious, and then I feel stressed. So language processing, another big one for a lot of autistic people. So language processing means making sense of what someone is saying. And do you actually understand what someone is saying? And that doesn't necessarily mean the each individual word. You might understand the words they're saying, but do you understand the meaning that they're putting on their words? And also, if someone is speaking too fast, are you able to keep up and process what they're saying? I have a friend and she's ADHD, she's not autistic, and she speaks so fast, and she jumps from topic to topic to topic to topic. It's part of her ADHD. I cannot keep up with her. I'm still on the first topic she's just said, and she's moved on 4 topics, and I just find it so difficult to process her language. And I have to keep saying, can you please stop and go back to the first thing you said? I'm still back there, and it can be very tiring. And only that she's my friend, I feel comfortable saying it to her. But if it's someone you don't know, it could be quite hard to explain that actually I need you to take breaks between what you're saying. So that could be a really big trigger. And then not having clear instructions. Autistic people are often not auditory people. We don't always have huge auditory strength, which means we're not always good at taking in information just from listening. We often need a visual of something, or we might need a video of something, or we might need to be actually shown how to do something. It has nothing to do with intelligence whatsoever. It's just how your brain processes information. And then there's the executive function triggers. So executive function is the ability to get things done from the beginning of a task to the end of a task. As I said already, this is huge for people who have ADHD. So there are lots of steps involved in getting any task done. And it begins with having to plan that you need to do something. You have to get your tools and yourself organized to do it. You have to manage your time when you're doing it. You have to have flexible thinking if any problems arise when you're doing it. You have to finish the task. You have to evaluate how the task went, etc. And a lot of autistic people have autistic inertia. So that means we find it really difficult to actually start a task. So especially if you're a little bit stressed, or the closer you are to burnout, or if you've had a meltdown earlier on today, you're going to be more prone to autistic inertia. So you might know you have to cook to dinner or do a task, but you can't physically get yourself up to start. And that's hugely triggering, because you're thinking, well, now I'm not going to have any dinner, or for me, if I get that to a severe level, the kids aren't going to have any dinner. So our autistic inertia can really affect other people as well. And knowing that, we can feel guilty, and then we can feel shame, and that's triggering in itself. And that brings back in our emotional dysregulation then. So that's why I just wrote down the self-criticism can occur if you're not achieving everything you want. A big one as well for autistic people is the flexible thinking. That would be a big one for me now, that if I'm trying to do something and a problem arises, I find it really hard to think flexibly and think how to get around a problem. So I can just leave a task unfinished because I cannot think outside the box. And the more stressed I am and the more triggers I've experienced in that day, the worse my flexible thinking is going to be. So why autistic people often do not know their own triggers? Well, we often don't know our own triggers because the first reason is alexithymia. If you don't recognize your own emotions, then you might not realize that you're being triggered or what is triggering you. You might become overwhelmed, and you might think back at the situation and go, I have no idea why I'm overwhelmed. You mightn't recognize that you were feeling stressed or that you were feeling sensory overloaded. We can spend so much of our time masking and so much of our effort masking and trying to make a social effort that we don't pay attention to ourselves. We don't pay attention to our own body. We don't listen to ourselves and listen to our gut and when our gut is telling us, uh-oh, you're really thirsty, you need to stop talking to this person and go and get a drink. We might not even recognize that we're thirsty. We might be trying so hard to socialize with other people that we are not thinking about the fact that there's a really loud background noise on and it's really, really stressing us. We might not even be aware that it's stressing us until you leave later and suddenly you have a banging headache and you feel really stressed and you don't know why. There can be multiple triggers in a scenario as well, or in life, so it can be hard to spot each trigger. So if you go into a restaurant, there might be loud noise, glaring lights, a big crowd, There's going to be different tastes. There's going to be different smells. There could be huge sensory input, for example. Then who are you meeting? Are you having to use your communication skills? Are you having stress triggers from socializing, from masking? There can be, all your triggers can be coming at you in one situation, and you might only be thinking about, it's the loud noise. You might not be thinking about the fact that you're masking, or the fact that you're finding it really hard to process what someone is saying to you, because you're only zoned in on the loud noise because that's the most obvious one. So it can be hard to actually break down all the different triggers and see what individual triggers you're having. We have busy adult lives, and that means we might be constantly on the go, and we don't have time to actually reflect on our triggers. We all have different triggers. There's no one book that we can all open and say, oh, all autistic people find loud noise and bright lights difficult, because actually we don't. Some autistic people love loud noise and love going to a big concert. I couldn't go to a big concert now. The noise would just ruin me. But some people would get such a kick out of that. So there is no one rule for all. There's also a real lack of education for autistic adults. There's quite a bit for autistic children, but again, it's not always evidence-based. But for us as autistic adults, there is no public support. Thank God for As I Am, because they provide a lot of education and really, really help people to develop their skills. But in the public system, if you go to your GP and you say, I'm finding life really stressful and I don't know what's triggering me, your GP is probably not going to know who to refer you to. And there just is a lack of response for autistic adults, which means a lack of education. So our ability to cope with triggers can change all the time. There is a lot of things that affect your ability to cope, and these are just some of them. So your mood, you can wake up in a bad mood one day and have no ability to cope with triggers. There might not be a reason for your bad mood, it's just a bad mood, but everything is annoying you. All your autistic triggers have just exploded. Hormones are a very big one, especially for women. So your menstrual cycle or menopause. Menopause is huge, and actually in Ireland, women going through their menopause has the highest rate of suicide among women, because your hormones just completely go haywire during menopause. So if you're autistic and that happens it's going to really affect your emotional regulation and really increase how you cope with your triggers. Your basic needs, whether you're hungry, whether you're thirsty, whether you've slept enough, whether you're having pain, if your basic needs are not met, you're not going to cope with triggers. And this is really difficult because if you've really poor interoception, which is the ability to understand the feelings in your body, as I said earlier, you might not recognize that you're hungry, or you might not recognize that you're thirsty. And insomnia and difficulty sleeping is really common in autistic people. Studies show we don't produce enough melatonin, the sleep hormone, and also autistic inertia is huge, just getting off that couch and going through your bedtime routine and getting into bed on time, and time management as well. It can be really hard to meet our basic needs. There's things in our diet that can affect our ability to cope with triggers, such as caffeine, because that will often reduce your sleep and also increase anxiety. Sugar as well is hugely emotionally dysregulating. And pain, I've included pain because so many autistic people are hypermobile or have autoimmune disease that can bring pain. And if you're in pain, it takes a lot of your focus. So you aren't spending as much time regulating yourself and thinking about how you're going to respond to triggers in your life, because you're going to be so preoccupied with your pain. Big life changes, that's a huge thing that will affect your ability to cope with triggers. If you're moving house, if you're starting a new job, if you've been unemployed for a number of years and suddenly you're starting a job, huge transition, and it can be hugely stressful. Burnout and autistic fatigue will also affect your ability to cope. Transition to adulthood, I think that is just one of the hardest parts of autistic life. We don't really know what to expect. It's full of unpredictability. And suddenly we're supposed to be independent, and it's not always easy or even possible. And also a buildup of trigger can of triggers can reduce our tolerance of triggers. And that's what this little diagram over here is about. So if you imagine the blue section is how many triggers you've been exposed to in your day, and the white section is your ability to cope with your triggers. So the more triggers you're being exposed to, the smaller your ability to cope is getting. And as you see here, in the third circle, it's really starting to fill up now with triggers. There's very little room to cope left, and then more triggers come, and you're going to hit your acute stress response. The benefit of learning to identify your triggers, it allows you to notice your buildup of triggers so you can intervene before you reach boiling point, i.e. meltdown or shutdown or burnout. So this little diagram here, I'm trying to show that the triggers are building up and building up and building up. But if you get to that third line there where you have one line left before you're going to hit your meltdown, if you've hit your third line of triggers and you think, okay, I'm really triggered now, and if I keep going the way I'm going to hit meltdown or shutdown, that shows you that you need to do something to regulate yourself and bring yourself back to feeling somewhat calm, or just to kind of empty out some of those triggers so you still have more space to cope with other triggers. It also, when you learn to identify your triggers, it allows you to create coping strategies for yourself, and these are going to be individual. It allows you to ration out your triggers. So the more you're aware of your triggers, if you are aware that supermarkets are a big triggering place for you, then you can plan, I'm not going to go to a supermarket before I go to a party. So it helps you just ration them out over the week and over a day, and helps you. I actually have a calendar, and I write down all the things I'm doing in the day. And I know if I have a big thing on one day, the next day of my calendar, I write rest. And that means I'm not allowed to book anyone that day. I'm not allowed to do anything. I'm not allowed to see anyone. I just need to chill out at home and allow myself to refuel again. And that will allow me to cope with more triggers again. It also allows you to create a quick, calm plan. So this is something I've come up with, and it's in my book. And it's a series of tools or strategies that helps you calm down and reduce your overwhelm quickly. I'll discuss this a bit later as well. The other benefit of identifying your triggers is being able to communicate your support needs to others. So if you're going somewhere and you know you're going to be triggered, you can communicate what you're going to need. You can ask the party host, is there a room available where I can go and have a little rest if I need it? Or you can ask someone to come with you. I often ask someone to come with me if I know I'm going to be very triggered. And knowing your triggers also makes life a lot more predictable. And that means we feel safer. If you know you're going to be triggered by something, it becomes less stressful because you're actually prepared for it. Unexpected triggers, personally, I find them the absolute worst. So this brings us on to the detective habit. So this is a habit I developed to identify and manage your triggers. It is 8 steps, and it allows me to look back at a situation that I found difficult, where I know I was triggered, but I don't know why I was triggered. So the purpose of the detective habit is to start identifying your triggers, spot the triggers. It also enables you to assess if anything else contributed to being triggered. Was there anything in the environment that increased my stress response and therefore increased the likelihood of being triggered? And it also finally then makes me think about supportive strategies for myself for the next time that I face that trigger. So I will go through each step, but the main 8 steps of the detective habit are: first, I ask myself, what happened? Then I ask myself, what did I feel? Did I feel fear? Did I have a headache? Did I feel an uncomfortable pain in my tummy? Was I embarrassed? Did I feel angry, etc.? The step 3, were there any triggers in the environment that are obvious to me? Was there a stressful person? Was there a moment of conflict? That's an obvious trigger. Was there a sensory trigger in the environment? Were there expectations on me that made me feel stressed? Step 4, at what point did I feel the stress response? And this is a really important point because we often don't know what our triggers are. The whole purpose of this exercise is to find out what your triggers are. So it's important to think, when did I actually start to feel the stress response? Because that's going to be your big clue. Did you feel it immediately? Was it at a transition time when you were moving from one room to another room? Was the location changing, etc.? Step 5, were my basic needs met beforehand? If you were hungry, thirsty, if you were in pain, if you were underslept, you are going to be more likely to react to a trigger. So something that doesn't trigger you normally might become the trigger now. Step 6, what were my strengths and what did I manage well? So you have to build on your own strengths. Sometimes it's really hard to find our strengths in a situation where we've had a meltdown or where we've shut down or we felt awful. And we look back and we think, oh, I was a disaster there now. But actually, if you really start paying attention, you might notice little strengths. You might not, and that's okay as well. But the more often you do this, the more you will start to notice little subtle things that are your strengths. And when you start noticing them, you can really build on them and bring them into your strategies. Step 7 is what could have helped me. So this might involve sensory tools, having a support person with you, having a visual plan before you ever go to the event you're going to, having a quiet room available, etc. And then the 8th step is what coping strategies would help me next time. So this is a really important part of the step, because there's no point in just identifying your triggers and then doing nothing about it. Yes, it's helpful to validate what is triggering you, and that will always be helpful in itself. But we know as adults, we're in charge of ourselves and we want to become as independent as we can. So we need to then build on what we've learned about our triggers so that we can help ourselves to cope the next time and just support ourselves. So I'm going to give you an example now of how I used the detective habit on myself. So I'm using this example because there's quite a lot of triggers for me in a supermarket. So step 1, what happened? I repeatedly found supermarkets a really stressful experience. I often went to a supermarket and I would just become acutely stressed, and I often just had to leave. I abandoned the trolley. I didn't care what was in it. Luckily, it was always before I hit the fridge and freezer section, so there was no real perishables in my trolley, so I didn't feel too guilty. It nearly always happened, or at least began in the same aisle. So I just had to leave, and I would often have a meltdown afterwards, and I would go into the car and I'd be crying and feeling like the biggest failure there ever was. What is wrong with me? I can't even do a shop. So step 2, what did I feel? So I know I felt overwhelmed, I felt unsafe, and I felt panic. Before I realized I was autistic, I always thought I was having repeated panic attacks. And it wasn't until I learned I was autistic that I realized actually most of them were meltdowns. And the difference is, in a panic attack, you actually have anxious thoughts, but I wasn't having anxious thoughts. I was just trying to go about my daily life, and I was having this feeling of intense panic. So step 4, were there any triggers in the environment? So to figure this out, I took the very drastic step of going back to the supermarket. I got a trolley, I walked around, and I had no intention of buying anything. My sole purpose was to apply the detective habit to the supermarket and figure out what my triggers were. So I started to look for triggers. This doesn't necessarily mean that these triggers were triggering me, but these were things that could be potentially triggering me. Now, the reason I'm saying this is because the more you do the detective habit, and if you start recording what was in the environment that might have triggered you, you will start to notice patterns. So, for example, I actually thought that I had no problem with glaring lights until I started doing the detective habit and realizing, oh, the glaring lights are coming up in an awful lot of these. They obviously are one of my triggers. And now, once I was aware of this, I really now feel, oh yeah, that light is triggering me now. So that's why I say go to the area and look for all the external things that are happening, what might be triggering you, and just record them and just be aware of them. So in this supermarket, this floor was really, really squeaky in the aisle where I would really start to panic. There was awful glare. It was a shampoo aisle, in that the aisle was full of bottles of shampoo. So there were just hundreds of bottles of shampoo. It was visually really overwhelming. There was also a huge amount of choice, because you couldn't just go in and say, I'm just buying that one bottle of shampoo. No, you had to be faced with advertising and be made to think, oh, maybe the shampoo I was planning on buying isn't the best shampoo. So that's hugely stressful as well. There's just too much choice. It was overwhelming my decision making. So that's a cognitive trigger on top of the sensory trigger of the glare and the squeak and the shiny bottles, and the lights were shining off individual bottles glaring back at me. So this was also the first aisle I realized where at the end of the aisle there was a cash register. So the cash register had flashing lights, and it had a really loud beeping noise. The other area I found really stressful in this walkabout was the temperature change, when the temperature would change. In particular, the fridge and freezers, I would often start shaking. And I'm so used to shaking that I didn't really think that this is because you're actually cold, Niamh. Like, I just feel these sensations in my body, and I shake very easily if I'm tired, if I'm hungry. So I wasn't really paying attention, but actually it was actually cold, and that's probably why I was shaking. So that was the trigger. Step 4, where are my basic needs met? So I often, sorry, now I know my time is up, but there's not actually that much left. Where my basic needs met. So it was often after a 13-hour shift, I'd often walk over after work in the hospital. I worked in intensive care. So I'd go straight from a really intensive 13-hour shift where someone could have died or could be dealing with like really traumatic situation, and I just go about my shopping. I could be hungry, you're smelling the food, so you're getting even hungrier, and I was wrecked physically and emotionally after a very long shift. So no, my basic needs were not met. The smell of food was making me hungry, but the choice overwhelmed me. I would always say, right, I have to go to the quick the kind of self-service checkout and quickly buy a snack, eat it before I go around the aisle. But then I'd get to the area and there was so much choice, I couldn't make a choice. I could not make a decision. So I'd end up just saying, oh, I'll forget about that, I'll just do my shopping. But of course I was hungry, so then I was getting more and more triggered. And then the temperature regulation as well. So step 5, at what point did I feel the stress response? So this was really interesting to me, because I actually began to feel a stress response as soon as I went up to the trolleys. Now, this is because I have recurring anxiety over trolleys, that I'm not going to have the right coin, or that it's not going to release, and I won't know what to do. And I can't stand the thought of having to ask someone for help, because I just get into an awful anxiety. So it actually began at that point. Then I would start having anxiety that I would have a panic attack, because I'd had a panic attack here before. The first aisle then in the shop was a book aisle, and I would just totally calm in this aisle because I adore books. I love this. I would go up to a book in a shop and smell it. I would hold it. I just adore books. So I would actually totally calm down in this aisle. But then as soon as I hit the shampoo aisle, the feeling intensified. So when I was doing this detective habit in the shop, I was thinking to myself, right, obviously something in the shampoo aisle is triggering me. This is the big aisle, and this is a big sensory trigger. Therefore, all these sensory triggers are probably what is actually causing my stress response. And it also intensified again in the fridge and freezer aisles, because, like I said, I was shivering and really, really cold. So step 7, what were my strengths in this situation? This was really hard to think about, what were my strengths. And one of the big strengths for me, and someone else would say that's a weakness, but to me, I let the mask down. I allowed myself to abandon a trolley and leave. That doesn't look normal. That looks like there's something really wrong with that person. She's just left her trolley and she's walked away. But I didn't care. To be honest, I was so overwhelmed I couldn't care less. But to me, that was actually my strength. I perceived danger, and so I protected myself by fleeing. So that actually, to me, is actually a good thing. And we shouldn't always be chastising ourselves for having a shutdown or a meltdown. We can't always help it. And if we have a shutdown, we're often actually protecting ourselves. It's not always something to be upset about. And as well, I kept trying on different occasions. So I was actually quite proud of myself that I didn't just say, right, I'm never going back there again anyway. That was a strength. I did keep trying. So what would have helped me? After I realized what had triggered me, I started asking myself, okay, how can I help myself like what would have helped me cope on that day. So one of the things I thought was it would have helped me to have a sensory tool to manage all the sensory triggers. It would have helped me if I'd understood why I felt so stressed. Because when we know why we feel stressed and when we know what's triggering us, we feel validated within ourselves, and that's actually really important. And just to respect yourself for feeling stressed, it's not our fault. It's not our fault. So just validate it for yourself. It would have helped me if I had just avoided the shampoo aisle completely, but that never dawned on me, you know. And it would have helped me to be fed, rested, and warm before I ever went. Step 8 then is the last step. So this is where you're planning for the future. So what will help me next time? So one of the things, bring a list so there's no choice. Bring a list of what snack you're going to eat. Bring a list of what shampoo you're going to buy. If I go to the shampoo aisle at all, I can buy shampoo in bulk. I don't have to buy it in my weekly shop at all. I can buy it in bulk and only need to buy it every two months or something. Also to change my pattern to do the shampoo aisle first or not at all, and keep the book aisle as my motivation for the end, so that if I am feeling a bit stressed, I know that I have the safe place to go to without having to abandon the trolley. I know I can go to the book aisle and smell these books or read these books, and I will calm down and I will be able to finish my task. Meet my basic needs before I go. Wear warm clothes or layers so I can cope with the fridge aisle. Walk up the shampoo aisle from the other direction so that I'm not looking at the cash registers. Or avoid it completely. And the reason I write in there about listening to my gut is that I can ask myself on the day, am I okay today to do the shampoo aisle, or do I need to give that a skip? As well, like I have really bad flexible thinking in the moment, and a lot of autistic people do struggle with that, but I have very good flexible thinking when I'm not acutely stressed. So this idea of walking up the shampoo aisle from the other direction, that is me using my flexible thinking strength, but I wouldn't be able to use that strength in the moment. So I need to plan that ahead. So that's why it's important to think before you go to these things. How are you going to cope if you feel triggered? And then consider online shopping when my tolerance to triggers is low. So this brings me on to my quick CAM plan. And this is an example of a quick CAM plan for me for shopping centres. So you are identifying main areas that you need a strategy or a sensory tool for. And then you make a plan of what you're going to use. So for example, the noise was a big area of stress for me. So therefore, in my CAM plan, my quick CAM plan, I need noise protection. So that might be earbuds, it might be ear defenders, it might be noise cancelling headphones. Something I find really helpful is to put on an audiobook or music on headphones, and I listen to that and I don't hear all the other noises then. Then there's the light and glare. That was another big trigger. So again, I need protection from the light and glare. So I can use sunglasses. And yes, I do walk around inside with sunglasses, and I do not care what anyone thinks about me. Sometimes wearing a hat can kind of give yourself a bit of shade over your eyes. And I always bring an eye mask with me as well. Obviously, I don't put it on while I'm doing my shopping, but if I was going into the car after I've been triggered, it will help me calm down to put on my eye mask, put on a song I like, and it'll just help me calm down. I'm a firm believer in stimming, and I think stimming is something that autistic people use often when we've hit our overwhelm, but actually it's a fantastic thing to do to help yourself prevent getting overwhelmed. You don't have to, sorry, just in case anyone doesn't know what stimming is, it's like a repetitive movement that we do with our body in order to regulate ourselves or to release uncomfortable emotion. So stereotypically famous stimming for autistic people would be hand flapping or spinning round and round. But stimming can be anything. It can be twirling your hair, it can be fiddling with a necklace. So for me, I actually use stimming stones, and I just carry them in my pocket. I have absolutely loads of stimming stones. So can you see them there? And that's something I just always have. And if I'm starting to feel stressed, I just twirl it in my hands. I also stim with my fingers. I do things like this. Worry stone. There's absolutely tons of fidgets for children. And I actually carry this little pouch around with me. It's strapped on, it's on the sunflower lanyard, which shows that you have a hidden disability. So if you do become stressed, you can show that to someone in the shop, and they are trained to know this person needs a bit of assistance. This is my little pouch, and inside my pouch, I always have a stimming stone, and I have my eye mask, and I have my little earbuds, and I often also bring soap around with me. It's a wrap soap, it's never been used, and I just smell it, and it just completely calms me down. So having your stimming tools really, really can be helpful. And then your sensory seeking tools. So the noise protection and light protection are about avoiding sensory triggers, but a sensory seeking tool is something that you actually seek out that calms you down. It might be a movement, it might be the soap to smell, it might be a crunchy snack, or drinking from a bottle of water. And the reason they're really helpful is because they activate the vestibular center behind your ear, and your vestibular sense is a really grounding sense to calm down. I would always advise making your quick calm plan visual. You might just text it to yourself, you might write it out. If you're going to something big like a wedding, I would always have a quick calm plan. It helps you to know what to do in the moment. And when we become overwhelmed, we stop being able to process what we're thinking or process what other people are thinking. So it's really helpful to just be able to take out your phone or take out your piece of paper, look at it and go, oh yeah, that's my plan. That's what I've told myself I'm going to do to calm myself down. I'm going to go to a quiet room. I'm going to stim with this stone. I'm going to smell my soap. I'm going to go into the bathroom and wash my hands and just take a little break and feel the cold water on my hand or put cold water on my neck or whatever. So a quick calm plan, it's just a very valuable tool. Now, I have run out of time. I was going to show you some other examples, but sure, you can read them on anyway in the notes. I won't go into them because apologies for that. So I'm at the end. So my conclusion, just, it's really important to get to know your triggers, but it is a process. It doesn't happen overnight and it can be hard, but just take your time with it. And the more you do it, the more you do the detective habit, for example, the easier it becomes. It's really worth spending time to figure out your own individual triggers so that you can ration them out, and also you can support yourself, and really importantly, so you can validate yourself, because we have to validate ourselves because other people often don't do it for us. It's up to us really to just support ourselves and be kind to ourselves. So the detective habit has 8 steps, and it involves reflecting back on a scenario and figuring out what triggered you and how you can support yourself next time. And quick calm plans are short plans of tools or strategies that can be made in advance of social situations or triggering situations, so you know what your plan is to get calm if you become stressed or triggered. And there's just some references there at the end. So that is it. I'm going to stop sharing now.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Niamh.
Thanks, Jennifer.
That was incredible. I know you were apologizing about going over, but personally, I didn't mind anyway because I just found it so informative. You're also such an articulate speaker. You really are brilliant. And
thank you, Jennifer. I was a bit nervous for my first time, but I actually really enjoyed.
Oh God, if you didn't tell anyone
about my special interest,
I think you're I think expert level. But also, I mean, personally, I found it just brilliant. I know we don't necessarily have time for many questions, but I might invite people to put in 1 or 2, maybe, if we have time, if you don't mind staying on a minute or 2.
Yeah, no problem.
To do just 1 or 2 questions. But whilst people are doing that, I just say, like, I found that really brilliant in the sense that I notice I probably don't give myself permission to experience stress or to acknowledge my stress, because I have a sense that I should be coping at all times. Like that, yes. Like going to the supermarket, I tell myself that's not stressful. Whereas I found that this was very validating in that way, and it was just really, really almost nice to reclaim stress not as a positive or a negative, and just see it as an experience.
Exactly.
And something that we can actually experience through and move through. One particular point I found brilliant was the idea of a simple conversation being stressful, because that's something I've tried to articulate multiple times and never done it successfully, and you just did it so brilliantly. So in our chat, we have lots of messages coming in of people saying thank you and everything, which is absolutely lovely. we have a question here actually, which is a really good question, is has learning to identify and manage your own triggers helped you in the process of helping your children?
Yeah, more than anything, you know, like the less stressed I am, the more I can help my children, and the better parent I am. So absolutely, because I get stressed by my child as well sometimes. Like if she has a meltdown, that's really stressful for me as a parent.
Yeah.
And the more I have regulated my stress levels before she hits meltdown, the better I will cope with her meltdown and not get completely overwhelmed by her meltdown. So by me always being aware of how triggered I am and how big my stress response is, and just taking a step back and doing something to calm myself down, that allows me to support her much, much better. So yes.
That's actually really, once again, I think you have a real honesty about how you talk about your stress, which is fantastic, because like that idea of acknowledging that sometimes your child's stress causes you stress.
Absolutely.
Whereas, you know, in reality, I feel like a lot of the time, many of us do that idea that we're like, I should be able to cope in this situation. Everyone else seems to be coping, you know, which is really fantastic. But we're getting a lot of messages in of people are thanking you and saying, you know, that was brilliant and it was incredibly well structured, and that a lot of people are going to buy your book, I think, which is great.
Lovely. And actually the first print run actually sold out. I couldn't believe it. So
really?
the second print run is
Absolutely
actually back in now.
surprised.
It just came in. So it is in Dubray and it's in Easons and it's in Waterstones.
Oh, that's great. Okay, that's great that it's a good timing actually that it's come back in.
It has now, yeah.
Which is brilliant. There is a question here, I suppose, of someone asking and said that they're an autistic student who's a mental health nurse, and they're looking if there is kind of any published articles about the detective habit, because it'd be great to have kind of something handy and evidence-based to pass on to patients, or is it just in your book?
Yeah, it's just in my book. I just came up with it myself. I haven't done any research on the detective habit. I came up with it by using research, but not my own research. So it's not published in any articles. So apologies, no.
Okay, brilliant. That's absolutely fine. We have another question of someone asking where they can actually get a sunflower lanyard. And I just think that's actually quite a good question. I know you can get them actually in Tesco, can't you?
That's where I got this one. But they also have a website in Ireland. I can't think of what it is now, but if you just put sunflower lanyard into your search engine, you'll find where it is. And they're often free. They're free in Tesco, and a lot of places recognize them. Airports and everything recognize them, so they are actually really helpful. And the website also allows you to give information if you want. So for example, if you become non-speaking when you are stressed, you can actually put that down. You can make a little card to go onto your lanyard, but you don't have to. The lanyard itself is recognized, but a lot of big supermarkets have it. If you actually go to their customer service and ask, do you have the sunflower lanyard, they might or might not.
That's actually brilliant. I never knew that. That's great. And we have one more question, which is actually really, really great, is the idea of, would you find that the detective habit can be easily adapted for children? This person is thinking of using it as well as for herself, but also with her son.
So yes, I would say I partly developed a detective habit because I began doing all those steps with my child. So I obviously, when you're a parent of an autistic child, your autistic child is too young and probably too inexperienced and probably has alexithymia to a higher degree than an adult would have. So they aren't always going to know their own triggers, and especially a younger child like a toddler, it's really up to the parent to start noticing their triggers. I am very lucky. I have an amazing occupational therapist who taught me, for my children, not for me, who really taught me what was triggering my child in the stress, in her sensory triggers. But it really was up to me to figure out all the other triggers. Nobody really tells you how to know what's triggering your child. It really is up to the parent, and it's extremely hard. And I think I was lucky in a way that I am autistic, because it meant I was more aware of what might be triggering her, and like something would trigger and I go, well, that would trigger me as well, you know. So, or if it doesn't trigger me, I could often see why it did trigger her, you know. Whereas a lot of non-autistic parents I know really struggle to, I cannot see why that triggered my child, whereas I'm like, sure, that's obvious why that triggered the child, you know. So that's why I really do think autistic adults are the key to understanding autistic children and supporting them. So yes, I do the detective habit with my children, but I do it kind of on them as opposed to them doing it. But then I really try to help them become aware, like, what are you feeling right now? Like, you look like you're feeling sad to me. Am I correct in that? Because you don't want to gaslight your children either. You don't want to tell them you're feeling sad when actually they might just be feeling hungry. So it's kind of always important to respect their own interpretation of their emotion and not always just push the emotion on them, what you think it might be or what you think you'd feel in that situation. But certainly asking them, oh yeah, you look like you're feeling a bit off. Are you a bit stressed? When did that start? Did it start when we came into this room? Okay, is there something you think that would calm down? Or like, before we go anywhere, I ask my kids, okay, bring your cam bags. What have you put in your cam bag? Have you a fidget? Have you a special interest? Have you, whatever. So I do use it with my kids a lot. Yeah, I find it really helpful. And they know now at this point, like, my daughter's 9 and she knows if we're going somewhere, she has her bag packed before we've ever left. And special interest is the key with children. There's nothing better than make sure you have something of their special interest everywhere you go. So yeah, I find it really helpful.
That's brilliant. It's a really nice, because I suppose it does seem as though it would lend itself really easily to being adapted, but like that, it's interesting here, just from a parent perspective, I suppose, how much you really do have to figure out on the fly, really. Which,
yeah, it's pretty huge and it's pretty overwhelming. And like that, now cognitively, it really increases your mental load. It's quite hard, and I think a lot of autistic people really find the transition to parenthood so difficult. I personally did. I thought I had postnatal depression, I thought, but actually I think I just had autistic burnout now. Now, I did have postnatal depression with my second child, but I think a lot of it was just burnout, I just had no idea how to manage all this huge responsibility and sensory and lack of sleep, and it was just like bam. So yeah, it's no joke. And then if they're autistic themselves, it comes with this whole other level of, you now need to manage this for them as well, when you might not actually be managing it for yourself. Yes. So it's a learning process.
That's actually, it is interesting, but I do think something that I've taken away from this and from listening to you, and I hope everyone else has too, is how much
I see a few people have put in the comments there about where you can get the lanyard. So whoever asked that question there, to just read the chat there, there's a good few places, actually, more than I realized. Yeah, so thanks for everyone who put that down. I haven't read the chat yet. I just spotted the links coming up there.
I have the chat saved, so I can send you it afterwards, so that you have everyone's feedback, just so you don't feel like you're missing out. But I'll actually just send a link. Someone has just sent a link of how to get one in Tesco. So hopefully, just in case anyone wants that. But I know we are running out of time, and we do have to stop and go back to our lives and all of that. But it was really fantastic just to hear.
Thank you, Jennifer, and thanks for all your help.
Honesty. I just found how honest you were made the conversation flow so much more, that I know you felt like you were probably talking the whole time, but it felt like a conversation. So it really got me thinking. So that was.
I'll stop now and I'll go, did I totally overshare?
No, not at all.
I'm a big oversharer, but I don't really care, to be honest.
No, not at all.
The more I overshare, the more other people will go, oh, I'm not alone. So that's, I learned from other people oversharing.
It's only positive. It's only positive. And just to say that this will be recorded. It has been recorded, so I'll share the recording with everyone who attended and everyone who registered and maybe couldn't attend for whatever reason tomorrow. So there's no worries there. And Niamh, if you send me on your slides, I can make sure everyone kind of has them, just in case they want to go through the references, or just have a
I'll certainly send them back.
So that's great. But I would like to thank everyone who came and took part and asked questions. I know there's more questions coming in that I know we don't have time to get to. But we really both do appreciate it, and on behalf of As I Am and the adult program, we absolutely really appreciate everyone taking part and kind of choosing to be vulnerable as well with us. But have a nice evening, everyone, and I hope you have a good rest of your week, and thank you again, Niamh. Really brilliant.
Thanks, Jennifer, and thanks for all your support in setting it up. You were really helpful, so thank you. I appreciate that.
Bye. Anytime. Bye, guys. Bye.